And I want to thank each of you for taking time out from your aquatic sports or whatever it is else that you had planned this afternoon to come down here a nice sunny afternoon. We're lucky it wasn't raining. One always wonders if it were raining, maybe we'd have an entirely different turnout and maybe even larger. But I think this is a remarkable showing for an afternoon like this. Rather than being out enjoying the sunshine, you're here about to see perhaps some of the days back when one could ride a streetcar in downtown Richmond at 10 p.m. or go down to Richmond Union High School down there where the old Grand Auto Store at the present time, and go to the teenage dances at night and come home without having any of those fears and concerns that we all share in this day and age. A different age, maybe we'll hear a little something about. This association, which I'm sure that a number of you have joined, you had that opportunity at the door there if you wondered what the crush was. That was your opportunity to join the Point Richmond History Association, which, like perhaps 90% of the other things in this community, is the brainchild and the result of the hard work of one of two individuals in this community, one of whom is, of course, walking around the room. That's Donna Rosidius. I'll let you figure out who that other individual is, who probably is responsible for most of the other things that happen here. She's also present. This afternoon we have a full program. We have a speaker first, who Donna will introduce, and then we have a bit of reminiscing and a little historical of the oral sort, which I hope various of you will assist us in by prodding our speakers and questioning our panelists as to things that they recall dating all the way back to the 1906 earthquake and perhaps a little bit before. So once again, welcome, and any of you who are interested incidentally in either knowing about that object in the wall there behind you, that quilt, that has to do with our Washington School PTA. Chances are available, raffle tickets are available on that quilt. Judy Spidiacci here, the president of the PTA, who is the lady hiding behind the plaids there, is the one who will make tickets available for you. And if you're interested, what is the price, Judy? Okay, and it'll be raffled off at the Whale of a Day, which is on May the 8th. Saturday, May the 8th, down at the school. You don't have to be present to win. Your participation there will be appreciated too. Each of you who have joined the association should have a copy of the latest publication, which is to say the periodical dated May 1982, featuring an article and interview with Mary Casey, who will be one of our speakers here this afternoon, one of our people engaging in a little reverie and telling us all about how things were back in those grand old days. The fact that this is the first meeting of the Point Richmond Association, of course, implies that there will be a second and a third, and so we'll begin to take applications from any speakers for future years. The requirements are, A, that you have lived quite a while, I won't say how long, B, that you have lived at Point Richmond for quite a while. People like me need not apply. You're not interested. We're not interested in hearing about people who walk through snow up to their armpits in Rochester, New York. That's of no interest to the people here. But if you lived at Point Richmond and you have some stories to tell, we'd like to have you on our panel on another occasion. Furthermore, you must be willing to speak out, and we've selected all of our panelists with those ideas in mind. They have to have an elephantine memory and be willing to speak out good and loud and clear this afternoon, and I'm sure they all will, and you'll have a chance to hear them in a few minutes. First, on the other hand, as soon as Donna is finished with her various housekeeping duties here, we'll let her introduce our formal speaker, who will give us a slideshow, some background, and some current information about Point Richmond, as well as some historical material. So, Donna, would you like to take over?
I'd like to introduce Bill Moxley, who's an instructor of California and Regional History at Contra Costa College. And he has a slide presentation, which you present this as part of your course, Bill?
Well, yes. It's part of it.
Okay, I'm going to let him say whatever he wants to about the presentation, and then we'll proceed with that.
Okay,
right away.
thank you, Donna. I've got to plug this thing in here first, and then we'll start. And in a minute, we'll probably get some lights out.
All right.
Some of these old photos don't show up very well. Let's get the lights out. First of all, I'd like to have just a word. Actually, I'm Bill Moxley, Contra Costa College history instructor. I've spent most of my life teaching United States history and political science. But about 3 years ago, we had a situation after Prop 13. You can always understand maybe why, that we had to have someone teaching this additional section of California history. We didn't have enough instructors to go around. So they said, well, Moxley, you know, when you come back in the fall, you're going to be teaching California history in addition to U.S. history and some other things I was teaching. I said, wow, I never had a course in California history. I was a history major, but so I had the opportunity that summer to sail to Hawaii and back. And so I read about 3 textbooks and everything I could get, almost sailing over and sailing back. And sure enough, come fall, I was teaching California history. Then about a year ago, I got the opportunity to take a sabbatical leave. And you good folks have paid enough taxes that you can allow one of your local history instructors a semester off with full pay to do something which is supposed to be, you know, very creative for your college. Well, I looked around and I found we have 3 colleges in our district, Contra Costa, Diablo Valley, and Los Bananos, and didn't have a single local or regional history course at any of them. Isn't that terrible? So I said, well, I'm into California history. Maybe I'll just kind of begin now to kind of zero in, maybe in the Bay Area, and maybe right on down to Contra Costa College. So it should really, to be honest, about 3 years ago, and more particularly just about a year and a half ago, that I began to do the regional local history thing. Now, I know a lot of you know a lot about, and more about, particularly certain aspects of local history than I do. And I don't, and I mean this a bit sincerely, I don't mind one damn bit being corrected. And, or finding out a lot of interesting things, and that's one reason why I'm here today, is to hear what you folks have to say. Now, one of the first things we did on this sabbatical was to collect old photos, make them into slides, and we've got about 1,000 now, covering most of Contra Costa County. And I pulled out, and it's really not quite balanced here, I pulled out maybe 40, 50 slides which relate to the Point Richmond shoreline development. It's really kind of, this presentation is really kind of an economic history of the Point Richmond shoreline. Now, maybe that won't satisfy all of you, but I'm sure some of you will be interested in that, and maybe all of you. And if some of you have old photos, which you'll allow Contra Costa College to photograph and make part of our collection, we'll make sure that they're used internally in the college and for the use of instructors, and not get out beyond that. We can guarantee that. So if you after the meeting today, can give me your names and allow the college sometime in the next 6 months or a year to photograph some of your old photos. What you'll be doing is building our college media center photo collection so that California history instructors in all 3 colleges in the future will be able to have the real thing to present to their classes. Okay, with that, we'll get started here. I might add that then we went ahead and offered a regional history course in the Bay Area this spring, and I had about 75 people show up, and about 60, 65 actually signed up for the course. So we have a Contra Costa now, and we'll teach this course again in the fall, a history of the San Francisco Bay region. And we do spend 2 or 3 sessions on Contra Costa County. Okay, let's start on Point Richmond slides. And we can have the lights. And we try to hold this now to about 20-25 minutes. So it can go pretty fast. Well, I'm going to assume that... you want it raised? I can raise it. I hope that might chop some of my slide top, might have to lower it. First of all, we should get a very good idea of the area we're talking about. It's an older map, And you can see at the bottom of the screen, Point Richmond, and then what the geographer would call a bight up to Castro Point. And as you know, the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge comes in there at Castro Point, and we're moving north to Malati, Point Malati. And you're all zeroing in now, getting your geographical location. A lot of you probably live nearby. Up at the top, we see Point San Pablo. And then off to the left there, at the top, you see the Brothers. And let's take a really good look at that, because some of the historical slides you'll be seeing are directly related to that. Oh yes, we've got Point Orient, just south of Point San Pablo, or San Pablo Point. So on top, we go San Pablo Point, and Point Orient, and down to Point Malati, Point Castro, and then down to Point Richmond. Okay, let's begin with a little history. No, let's begin with another map. There it is again. And there you can see the inner harbor. Focus on that for a moment. And very south on the left side of your picture, you can see the jetty, and where the old shipyards were, and the new marina is on the right and center. And that great big bay, of course, is San Pablo Bay. And jutting out on the top, on the right, is Point Cano. Now we'll start with the Indian. Now this is one of the more famous slides that's often used in textbooks, and I just put this in really to remind me to say to you that really the first inhabitants, running back up to 5,000 years ago, but for sure up to 4,000 years ago, were the Indians, which the Spanish call the Costanoans. The Carquinas were in this area, and keep in mind that from Point Castro to Point San Pablo, it's been well established that there were at least 17 to 20 villages of Costanoans or Carquinas right in that area there. We'll talk a little about that, more about that in just a moment. Now, this is a well-known sketch of Captain George Ellis's landing. Now, Captain George Ellis had about 60 to 90 acres right out where right now you would find the area of the Port of Richmond terminal complex. And that, of course, before Captain George Ellis, by about 3,000 to 4,000 years, was a major Indian village and villages, where you had, by the 20th century, a shell mound of major proportions. And Captain George Ellis was there, of course, because he was one of the first in here to engage in the commercial running of these two sloops who ran between Richmond. This was before the turn of the century. This is back into the 1850s, and he began the process of carrying people and goods between really the Point Richmond area, or the Richmond area, and San Francisco. Now the Indians that I mentioned actually had a societies dating back 3,000 to 4,000 years. Major archaeological excavations done in 1910 showed that the Point Richmond shell mound there, where Captain George Ellis put his operation, had dated back at least 3,500 years, and an archaeologist by the name of Dr. Nelson showed the extent of those villages, found 150 skeletons, thousands and thousands of tools, and so our area was really well inhabited by Indians. Now, going back again, these two sloops actually could sail, particularly at high tide and much larger boats, right from the South Bay into San Pablo Bay, because Point Richmond, as most of you know, was an island. And all of that from the inner harbor there up to the northern part of Point Richmond was underwater at high tide. And of course, it was common for ships of the bay of some size sailed right past what is now, through part of the Richmond Standard Refinery and the Santa Fe Railroad complex. And where did Captain George Ellis take his goods and people? Over to San Francisco, and this is what San Francisco looked like in the 1850s. Although his operation was pretty small, San Francisco was a major city, at least for the Pacific coast at that time. And here was San Francisco in the 1850s, and of course that was a most important place, and many of the commercial offsprings of the city related to the area around Richmond. Now this is a whaler, and you all know that Contra Costa County had, and Point Richmond had, the last operative whaling station on the Pacific coast. Someone said the United States. Lasting to the 1860s, and it's still there, and of course if you haven't seen it, you can go out, there it is. That's the whaling station as it is as of last week when I took this photo. Now, if you want to go back into the mid-19th century, a little thereafter, in 1865 up to about 1910, 1912, the Chinese had a major shrimp camp. And someone say where this is. Yeah, Point Melati. And there were up to, perhaps 300 or 400 Chinese living in the Chinese shrimp camp. And they operated in these kinds of boats. They were shrimping. And this was a big operation because they actually processed the shrimp, shipped it out from the Bay Area, mostly to the Orient, but it was a major income for the Chinese as well as for the Bay Area. And these are all actual photos now that you're seeing. They operated in boats up to about 40 feet in length in the shrimping business. And of course there were a number of shrimp camps on the bay, and Point Richmond had one of the largest. The next important historical development, and as we come, well, I'm backed up this once here and say something about why the shrimping went out of business. In 1912, the state legislature declared a 5-year moratorium because they were afraid that, and it was true, that the shrimp were being shrimped out. And so really what put that shrimp camp out of business about just after the turn of the century was the state legislature and this moratorium on shrimping. And so within a few years, after about 1910 to about 1915, the Chinese, who were well known at Point Richmond, were gone pretty much, and shrimping was dead as far as actual commercial operations in the bay was concerned. Now this is at Point what? Point, but what's the point? Point Richmond. Point Richmond. This is at Point Richmond, and I'll back up, but I want to show you this one. This is from the bay side. This is the Santa Fe Railroad ferry terminal, which points out toward San Francisco. And why? Well, back about the year 1900, Santa Fe ran into Richmond. And in fact, on July 3rd, 1900, the first group of passengers left the city of San Francisco on a ferry. What ferry? This one right here, the Ocean Way, crossed the bay to the point, loaded up on a Santa Fe Railroad for a trip to Chicago. And this was the beginning of the Transcontinental Railroad, right from Point Richmond, really, to Chicago or points east. And this was a major operation for the commercial development of our community, because it was decided by Santa Fe that they would actually save 12 or 14 miles by putting their ferry terminal at Point Richmond rather than Oakland. In fact, they had a big competitor in Oakland, and that was the Southern Pacific Railroad. So Santa Fe ran their operation from Southern California up the San Joaquin Valley to Stockton, and then west to Richmond, and then right out to Point Richmond, where for many, many years, people leaving San Francisco or the Bay or Peninsula would take a ferry, like the Ocean Way here, to Point Richmond, load up on Santa Fe, and go east. And of course, going west, you do the same. You come from the east, right to Point Richmond, through the tunnel here at Point Richmond, out to the ferry, and away you go. And of course, the terminal is still intact to some extent out there, and here it is as of just a few weeks ago, in fact. About that time, remember we're talking about the year 1900, this is pretty much what your community looked like. And guess what's in the air?
It's still there.
I have a gut feeling that it's still there, but it's better disguised these days. And here's another look at your community. And I'm sure that is, so what street is that? That's Richmond Avenue, and there's the bank right up there in the corner. First Richmond Bank. Here's a little bit later. You can see the refinery, which we'll zero in on in a moment. And there's across the street. There's the bank. And you can see that's a little bit later. Richmond and Washington streets. And here is the refinery. Now, the next biggie as far as commercial development after the Santa Fe Railroad, and by the way, I forgot to say, the Santa Fe not only brought in the railroad, but the Santa Fe shops, and that brought in the Pullman Company. So we not only had the western terminus of the Santa Fe as a transcontinental railroad, but we had the Santa Fe shops, we also got the Pullman Company, and that really put Richmond on the map commercially. But the next biggie was the refinery itself. And Colonel Ream of the Standard Corporation came over to this area just at the turn of the century, and this was about 1900, 1901, and bought for Stanford 1,700 acres for $15,000. An amazing transformation took place. Within about a year, this refinery was the third largest in the world and the largest on the Pacific coast. And it went into operation in 1901. It's been in operation, as you know, ever since. Today it has about 2,300 employees and has been a major stay of this community for a long time. And this is the refinery, very early part of the 20th century. Now, in those days, we weren't so much into gasoline as kerosene. Did all kinds of things here. They had a whale oil operation, acid plant. They repaired ships, had a can and barrel factory. A lot of things which are, of course, are out of mode today, and but changed with the times necessary. I don't think the pollution laws were too strong. And this was the big fire in 1909. Wow. This was the Point Orient Standard can and or box and barrel factory. If you go out to Point Orient, you look around, see none of this. This is the way it was at that time. This is a kind of square rigger that came in to load up at Point Orient. Okay, this was the next in line for putting Richmond, Point Richmond on the map economically. And this was the largest winery in the world, the Wine Haven, and I think you know where that is. Out now it's the Naval Fuel Depot as of World War II. This was established in 1906, and within a few years was the largest winery in the world. It had 3,000 vats, capacity of 12 million storage gallons, 1,000 employees, company town, mostly Italians. Here it is as of a few weeks ago. Still there, still beautiful. If you haven't been out there lately, you might go take a look. It's, of course, a national historic place, and I think the Navy will keep it up. Had a beautiful 29-room hotel which burned down in the 60s. The small cottages there were built back at the time. Operated from 1906 until the early 20s when Prohibition put it out of business. But in that time, CALWA, as it was known, California Wine Association, the CALWA brand, had 67 varieties of wine drawn from 40 Central Valley vineyards. We had a lot of ferries coming in, a lot of cars coming in, unloading wine grapes, and it's a very large operation. That is wine haven from the south, looking north. In the 20s, Prohibition comes and they have to shut down. They begin to sell out, and they spawn a number of other wineries which are still operating in California. Interesting aspect of those, the feds came in the 20s and dumped 250,000 gallons of wine into the bay. That was really pretty dirty. Another important commercial development, where is this? This is Brickyard Cove. And this is the Los Angeles Press Brick Company, which really made a lot of the bricks for not only our county, but for the city of San Francisco for a long, long time, starting about 1906 also. Of course, there are beautiful yachts parked out there in Brickyard Cove Marina and Richmond Yacht Club now. This was a big operation. In fact, the bricks from here built the famous Palace Hotel in San Francisco.
They use local workers for that reason.
I'm really not sure about that. And no. In fact, we had a major quarry over at Castro. They're asking about where we got dirt and that kind of thing. Of course, this is what it looks like today with Brickyard Cove, the new homes out there at Brickyard Cove, and the Richmond Yacht Club. I don't know, maybe it looked better 80 years ago. Just off, this is one of my favorites, because just off of Point Richmond and just off of Brickyard Cove is Southampton Lighthouse. Isn't it a beauty? It's not there anymore. Those stanchions sticking up there are still there, which boats run into and fog. But it's a beautiful lighthouse. And of course, that is still part of our community. And as you know, that's the East Brothers Lighthouse Station, established in, I think, 1884, still operative. 1873. Oh, yes. Well, I know who we have here. But just to change that on my notes, will you? Let me look this up. Okay? I've got to look that up because I think I'm down to 1884. And I am. Well, I can't find it now. That's where it is. Anyway, let's talk about the brothers. The brothers, of course, are two islands, and the one on the east, of course, is where the lighthouse is. I really shouldn't be discussing this. We have 2 or 3 people here today that know the specific history. Of course, it's been saved recently by an organization which has now, through a partial grant from the Department of Interior, has been able to restore it. And you can go out there and stay weekends, I understand, for some small price. And it's still a lighthouse. It's very important to the traffic of the bay for many, many years. And of course, you can see how complete it is. And I believe it's one of the 3 remaining types of lighthouses where families are actually stationed, still operative on the west coast, or at least restored. And it was a very, very active place, say at the turn of the century. Next in line of the Point Richmond shoreline development was the ferry, which ran between Point Castro here and Point San Quentin. Now, this was established in 1915 because, of course, we had no bridge. Now, this photo shows the bridge actually being built to the left there. This was the Richmond San Rafael Bridge. And these would be the last days of the ferry. It operated from 1915 to the 1950s, and it was quite an operation. This is the end of it. This is about the last ferry, 1956. The bridge is completed, and it's about the end of it. Let's go back to that. I read an interesting story the other day about one of the ferries which left Point San Quentin in 1921. One of the most horrendous rides on a ferry in the history of the world. They're heading over to what I just showed you, to this point, from Point San Quentin, and they got just out about in the middle of the point of the San Pablo Bay, and a gale hit. A gale force winds. And their rudder broke off. And then one of their small, well, not so small lifeboats broke loose and started smashing the cars around. Then the guy wires, which held up the smokestack there, which held up the smokestack, began to snap and break, and the smokestack began to come over. Then, of course, by that time, all the people were in their life jackets. And they were out there rudderless in this gale for 5 hours before they were rescued and towed to safety. Not a single loss of life. It was one of the hairiest ferry rides in the history of this San Francisco Bay ferry. And I was interested in reading that one of the gentlemen tied life jackets all around his car. Can't you see his amazement when it went down? This, of course, is the Pacific Locomotive Association, established in the early 60s as really as a museum. And you can go out to Point Castro, which is, of course, near where we just saw the ferry operation was. And I think on the first Sunday of each month, take a ride and see what's there. It's a very historical place, and I recommend it to you if you haven't taken a close look at what's there. Now take a really good look at this, because this is either the late 20s or the early 30s, and by that time the inner harbor had been dredged and was in. You can see some operation going on there, but you can see also that this area was very underdeveloped. Let me take a good look at that. Now what do we see? Just a this is only about 10 years after that. Maybe at the most 15. You can see what that is. That's the Kaiser shipyards during World War II. And that was a massive, very quick development. And as you know, that's what exploded the population of Richmond from 23,000 in about 1940 to over 100,000 by the end of the war. Now, Kaiser, as we know, was an engineering genius. He was able to put together this operation very quickly with a lot of help and a lot of our federal monies. We had, during World War II, we had 727 Victory Liberty ships built in Richmond. That was 20% of the U.S. output. We had 90,000 plus workers working in 8-hour shifts, 3 8-hour shifts, never closed down. Some of the ships were built in 3 days. It was a really massive operation, and of course occurred here just about where the new marina is, and in that inner harbor that we saw. And so we'll take a look at World War II shipyard development. Most of these slides came from the Richmond Museum. They have a good collection. That gives you an idea. I think they had over 20 shipways, 4 major yards, and 24 shipways. Now we're going to see one being put together. Of course, it was an assembly line operation, and that's why they put the ships together so quickly. Here are some of the photos of the ship going together, but this is the same ship. I wasn't able to do that yet. Well, it was going about as fast as I'm thinking. And then down the shipway, wham, christened. There it goes. water, splash. And here are some of the workers. And here is Rosie. And here are some of the women modeling various shipyard clothing supposed to wear. And then, of course, if you went to work, there were a lot of minorities hired, a lot of women hired. Kaiser searched the country for workers. In fact, he also hired midgets for certain kinds of operations aboard the boats. Anybody, pretty much. Then you went down to Capitol in Oakland, I guess it was, not too close by here, and bought your stuff. And then you lived in this kind of house. No, I don't really believe that's shipyard housing. To the left there, that's shipyard housing. And to the right, but some people say they did live in shacks like these because, you know, what happened? Too many people, not enough homes. And, of course, there's the mothball fleet. Remember, we produced well over 700 of these right here in Richmond during World War II. Now, there we are, back again. Talk a little bit about the Port of Richmond here. Right there where the shipyards were, right now being developed, as you know, is the new marina. It's partly in, another 15 to 20 years to go. The only thing that's cut out of that model now, for sure, it looks like the convention hotel will not be built. There'll be 2,000 berths, and a lot of them are in right now. And there will be at least 3,500 housing units, condominiums, 12 acres of parks. If you haven't been down there, it's at the foot of Marina Way. It's quite an operation. And that's quite a change from the shipyard days. Of course, the Port of Richmond is now, a main part of it is the terminal development. And keep in mind, too, that the Port of Richmond, tonnage-wise, ships out a third of the Bay Area's tonnage. Contra Costa County has a half of it because of all the oil tonnage. This is becoming important, and you might contrast that. Remember, the 1850s, that's only 130 years ago, that's where Captain George Ellis's operation was, right about here. Now, we're going to go, kind of running out of time, so we're going to go quickly here. We're just going to go counterclockwise from the inner harbor and the terminal area there, container port, counterclockwise north, around. At time we tell a very interesting story about Red Rock, sometimes called Malati Island, called Golden Rock. It's had a number of names. Probably the most interesting thing that happened there is in, I believe it was in the somebody's going to catch me on this. I think it was in the 1850s that Wadsworth, son of the poet, actually built a house there, raised a flagpole, mounted a cannon on Red Rock. Sticks up 167 feet. Chester A. Arthur took it over as President of the United States in the 1880s to, as a military outpost, and thought they would, of course, defend the interior part of the bay from Red Rock. That never developed. Or the Swedes and Norwegians also mined manganese, low-grade manganese from there, took it as ballast in their ships all the way home. So that Red Rock has been from time to time quarries. And more recently, major yacht harbors have been proposed, and even massive hotels to be built on Red Rock, and maybe we'll see it in the future. We're going on around there, Red Rock. Or call it Malati Island, that's better. Golden Island. Now, there was a long work. There you can see why Santa Fe could cut 12 miles off its run, transcontinental run, and pick up its people from San Francisco. There's Point Richmond pointing right out toward Angel Island in the city. Right out out at the end there was the ferry, the Santa Fe Railroad. Now, as far as I know, this is Mr. Thole, the oldest resident of your community. And he plays a mean harmonica. And he lived here even during the earthquake and fire, 1906. We'll get him down here someday to tell his story. It does show, remember, he has lived here for almost the entire, really, development, commercial development of this entire area. He's been here. It shows one how fast time goes by, but how fast we developed Point Richmond shoreline. Now, this is Moxley. This is me. When I first arrived in Contra Costa County and was driving up to Contra Costa College, and this is, I think there's some ladies from the Point Richmond Historical Society. And this is, I think this is Donna Rosillo. Back in the better days. Now this one is the truth. This is Contra Costa College's Air Force. That's actually an airfield which was partly on the campus back shortly after the turn of the century, and I think it kind of shows our development around the San Pablo area in the years, only about 60 to 70 years. Okay, that's all, folks. Thank you very much.
Actually, thank you very much, and while we're getting our panelists up here, anyone who would like to avail themselves of the coffee, the tea, and don't have any milk, I believe, but other than that, I should be a stewardess type up to that point. You step right up and grab it now, because we'll get started with our panel in just a few minutes. Rosenthal from the Masters has been
I'll try to make this very brief and very loud. We're from the Masters. I'm Irene Rosenthal. This is Arlene Getz. And we're just here really to express our pleasure in joining with this group. We feel we have interests in common. After the slideshow presentation, I must say I don't feel that we've been here as long as we think we have, but we've been here for 21 years. We're across the street, and I recognize many of your faces from attending our theater. We put on about 5 productions a year. Some are musicals, some are dramas, some are comedies, and Arlene has been in several of our recent productions. One of the reasons that we're here and that we're interested in joining with you is that we do consider ourselves a historic site in Point Richmond. As a matter of fact, we applied for and received a historic preservation grant, except that it wasn't funded last year. So we do qualify as a historic site here. We have been in the middle of a fundraising drive for the last 2 years because we are in danger. The building that we're housed in, which is across the street at 105 Park Place, may be sold, and we do not have the funds to buy it. So we're very interested in raising money. We have raised $30,000 in pledges from our loyal following, which is very nice and probably includes many of you. But we obviously would need a lot more money than that to stay here, and that's what we're interested in doing. We're very attached to Point Richmond, having been here as long as we have. Many of you may know our director, Jo Camp, who wasn't able to be here today because she's directing across the street. We have a matinee today. What we'd like is to join with you and to also ask for your support. If you have information about where we can apply, contacts with people or corporations who would be interested in funding our remaining here at the Point Richmond site, please contact one of us after we're finished. We have some information, some brochure, some pamphlets and things about us, about a recent article that Gordon Radu wrote in the newspaper and so forth about our plight. And we're just here really to introduce ourselves.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
I wanted to add that I had no notion that there would be so many people here, so I copied just a few histories of the theater, how it came to be here, which is back there. Also, more plentiful announcements of our season this year. If you haven't already come to any of our shows, we still have 3 more to go this year, which we're hopefully going to be able to perform in Port Richmond. We weren't very sure about that. And just to add one other thing to what Irene has said, $30,000 in pledges that we received was by and large from our patrons. And we feel we've exhausted that source of generosity. And what we're really interested in is larger foundations, businesses, people who might be interested in helping us to stay here. So if you have any ideas, myself, Irene, Bill, Pam, anybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that we're all very interested in is that the Masters stay in Point Richmond. Some of you saw, before you came in, some antique cars going around, and we all wondered if they came just for us, but they didn't. They came to go on a picnic, and they promised that they would be back around 3 o'clock and would circle us again. So, and Tressa, do you have a short announcement?
Oh, sure. I'm the Archives Chairman for the History Association, and one of our goals is to establish an archives of Point Richmond materials at Point Richmond, and we're developing it now as we go along to do research for books and the newsletter. We are also interested in obtaining photographs. Carolyn Davidson was nice enough to bring this one for us today, and if anyone has photographs of Point Richmond, they don't have to all be from 1904, even things from the war, even contemporary. We would like to start collecting photographs. If you have photographs that you think we might be interested in, you can sign up at the back at the table where the slide projector is. If you would prefer to not donate them, we have arranged to have them copied. And you could loan us the photographs, and we could copy them for our archives and then return them to you. So we would really appreciate it if you would go through boxes in the attic and old paraphernalia that you may have, and bring us anything that you think you might be interested in.
Slides? You want slides also?
Slides, documents, written materials of any kind, or significant objects that deal with the history of Point Richmond. We're not set up to be a museum, and we have no intention of doing so, but we would like to obtain materials to further our research and our knowledge of the history of Point Richmond so that we can continue to put out publications. Thank you.
Would anyone in the back like to come up front? I count 12 chairs up here. We promise not to take the collection. I think you'll hear a lot better. Well, I think we're ready to begin with the meat of this program. We've had the introductory portions and an interesting and I think provocative slideshow, which I hope will raise some questions. We have 6 people, as you can see on our panel, who are prepared to talk about things as they once were. Mary Casey, down at my far left, as I said, is the subject of the lead article here in the This Point newsletter. Mary came here in 1906.
Wait a minute, excuse me, 1905 it should be.
1905.
On the old ocean wave.
I subscribe to Mark Twain's notion that truth is a very precious commodity and you should use it only sparingly. And I trust that this afternoon there will be a number of corrections to be made, so we'll start off with me. Mary moved into her current home, I'm told, on Golden Gate Avenue. Her father operated a store next to the Hotel Mac across the road. She was in the first class to go all the way through Richmond Union High School. That's back in the time when Richmond Union was up near the Grand Auto Store, where it is now located on the same plot there at 23rd and Bissell. I don't know where Casey Street came from. Is that any connection with the family?
That's right, they originated that over at the City Hall while I was working there. I came back one day and found we had a street named after us.
That's all it took in those days, eh?
No,
Well,
it didn't.
That's interesting.
I had been away, and they wanted to do something, and I was afraid I would say no, you know. So that's how it happened, I guess.
Oh,
They
okay.
put it over.
All right, Mary worked for the city of Richmond, as she pointed out. I understand that she came from England via Australia to the United States.
No, it came directly from Australia here.
Directly from Australia.
To San Francisco for a couple of months, and then quite Richmond all the rest of the time. That's quite a long time, too.
Okay. Next in line is Eleanor Hurley, who I understand came here in 1916. Would you like to correct me too? Is that correct?
I think we came about 1913 or 14, before the war.
Okay. And you lived, I understand, on Nickel with your brother and your mother, and you purchased your current home on Idaho subsequent to that, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
All right. And worked at Standard in the office, is that correct? And retired from the Standard Oil Company? Next in line is...
I might also say that we previously lived on the corner of Washington and Richmond, where the grocery store is now. That was Mr. Whiteside bought that property and built the store, and that's why we moved. We probably still be there if it hadn't been.
All right, next is Miss Carolyn Davidson, who lives over at 207 Buena Vista, who's been the subject, of course, of much comment in the newspaper of late, being as how we've had some weather that was a bit unexpected. Her home, I understand, was built in 1901 and did very nicely up until 1981. So we had 80 years of no difficulties, and then this year's developments. The home is pictured in the very earliest pictures that are available of Point Richmond. It was occupied, I understand, by the Schubach family. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Schubach.
Schubach.
Yeah.
And until the Davidson family bought it, Caroline's family came here from Scotland. Is that correct? In 1907, she's the past president of the West Side Improvement Club, and I understand for a period of 8 years. She has in her family 3 generations of youngsters who have gone through the Richmond schools, which is to say her brother and then her brother's youngsters, and then their grandchildren, in turn the brother's grandchildren. Caroline was 15 when she moved here, is that correct?
Yeah.
Father worked at Standard Oil, as she did, and she went to Washington School, which I believe was the earlier building, of course, down here, through the 8th grade. And worked 23 years at Standard, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And in the accounting department. Okay, next in line is Tranny Dornan, who we all know, any of us who have had to purchase a nail or a bit of a slug killer on occasion. In 1905, Robert Dornan Sr., who was then 23, arrived here from Ireland. He operated out of Hazel Carr's Point Richmond real estate building. If you can believe that, he ran a moving company out of the little building down here, which still exists. Tranny, I understand, tells us that it cost 15 cents to move a trunk from the train station to the home, and she still has the brass license plates. We should have asked her to bring those along here to hang on the wall as an extra decoration this afternoon. Still has those plates. In 1944, they moved next door into 145 West Richmond. The building was renovated. And in 1966, on Mr. Dornan's death, she became the sole operator of the business. She's lived here since she was 8 years old, and she's one of those I know who can tell us something about the earthquake and fire. She was born, I understand, in Butte City, is that correct, up near Sacramento? Her father worked at Standard Oil Company. And Marion Downey, who is my neighbor, a McMenamin. Right. I have trouble with those Irish names. I married a McGowan and had difficulties with those McMenamins and O'Flahertys and so on. Her parents bought the home at 111 Crest in 1914. The house was built, I understand, in about 1903. Marion married John Patrick Downey in 1921. And subsequently they moved, they lived here for a period of time in various homes, including the one at the corner of Crest and Washington, which is now occupied by the Pashes, and the home next door as well. In 1944-45, Marion and her husband with Santa Fe moved down to Barstow, where they lived for a period of time, and on his death moved back here in 1960. Marion is now my neighbor, living directly across the road. She was 7 or 8 years old when she moved here. I'm not sure about that. Are you?
I think it was 7.
I think it was 7, okay. And she worked for a period of time out at Whitehaven, which those of you who have any interest in the architecture of the area realize is one of our gems, and maybe Marion can tell us a little something about that in a few minutes.
Just say I worked in the office.
Worked in the office. I've been wondering what happened to all of those fish when that tragic day came. Fishing must have been easy around here. Marion is the one who tells me these stories about going to high school functions that ended at 10 in the evening out at the old Richmond Union High School and coming back in the streetcar. And Clara Stribley is next in line. Clarice is Marion's cousin. She has not been a appointed resident for a period of time. She lived here a number of years back, and it isn't entirely clear to me just when she began living here, but her parents, the Careys, bought the home at 128 Cottage, which is now the home occupied by Pat Brenner, in 1919. Is that correct? Way before that. Well, you can fill me in on that. Her father, Michael, was Richmond City Councilman from 1919 until 1924. And after her father's death, Marion Downey bought that home, which she still owns. Clarice lived in Martinez for a period of time, married Mr. Stribley, and then moved to San Rafael. Mr. Stribley, of course, is still very much on the scene locally. He's down here on McDonald Avenue with his jewelry shop. And I think with that, we're probably ready to begin. Now, when I was assigned this project, I felt a little bit like the Sultan who inherited the harem. I knew I am here, but not where to begin. And I think that probably the easiest way to handle this is merely to do it chronologically. And I'd like to fill you in just very briefly in order to set the stage. I have talked to Lawrence Thole. Lawrence Thole is the wonderful old gentleman whose picture you saw a couple of times there in the slides. Lawrence is indeed a remarkable harmonica player and also a guitarist. And I understand in addition to his 100th birthday party, he played the piano while others danced. That's a standard for some of the rest of us to try to measure up to. Lawrence wandered across the street one day and told me there's a vacant lot right adjacent to my house. And he told me that in 1906 he stood there and watched San Francisco burn. And at one point, a piece of paper came drifting across the bay, and it drifted down at his feet, and he picked it up, and it had been charred thoroughly, but it was still possible to read something on the paper. So there are folks around here who, he didn't tell me about the shaking, which incidentally I'm told I'm going to hear from Ms. Casey, but in any event, the experience that a number of people went through, I hope, has been kind of brought back to memory by some of these photos, and I think perhaps we can start maybe with Tranny. Tranny, can you tell us a little something about what you experienced and what you were perhaps telling about outdoors here, as far as the earthquake was concerned?
Oh.
Why don't you just go ahead and just, you can stand up or sit down as you choose, whatever's comfortable.
We had, my mother and father just moved here in 1905. And when we first moved here, we lived over on what is now Ocean Avenue. Houses were kind of scarce at the time, and we felt we were fortunate they were, my folks, to find a home down there. And then we moved over on Golden Gate and Summit, the next house, and that's where we lived when the earthquake was. It was very, the first one, I don't think I'd ever heard the word earthquake before, but it was violent. If there was anybody here that lived here, they know how rough it was. The house just shook, and we felt like it was going around in a circle and making so much noise the ground, the earth, was. We found cracks out in the yard afterwards, but the house stood up and we didn't have any fire. But people burned coal oil lamps then. No gas, coal and wood and stuff like that.
So none of the lamps tipped over, you didn't have a fire problem?
Pardon?
None of the lamps tipped over, you didn't have a potential fire problem?
They were on tables and, different rooms. I can remember my mother just running around from one room to the other, putting out the lamps, because it was in the morning, about 5:30.
Mary, do you have any recollections about that?
Oh, yes.
Mary, sure.
Sure do. It sure shook the place. I know that because we were children growing up and we didn't know what was happening. The furniture moving, and the lamps moving, because we got out as quickly as we could. And you saw the cracks in it. We used to have a Santa Fe depot down here, between where that strip is there now. by Dorothy's kitchen in there.
Railroad Avenue.
And yeah, and there was great big gaps in that, and of course, we thought the earth was going to open up and swallow us. You say way up our way, you could see the fire from our house in San Francisco, and some of the great chimneys out the Standard flopped over too. And every time it seems like we want to go back in the house, the place would shake. So we had terrible time, we just about lived outside.
Were there any fires at Point Richmond at all?
I don't remember that part of it, except that we didn't have any damage or anything like that. And another thing, refugees used to come over, free, and what someone said about the paper coming over was true, too. It would blow over the wind. But we had relatives who were down in San Francisco, too, so we were very much, in looking into all that kind of thing. In fact, I went over to San Francisco with my dad. He wanted to go and find his brother there, so they gave us a pass to go over, because my dad was in the newspaper business. And we went over there, and it was a shambles. But here in Richmond, it wasn't that bad in comparison to what happened, the quake. And he was in the newspaper business. He had the carrying, delivering, and collecting, and everything at that time in order to make a living. And we helped, my brothers delivered. And Louis Bernardi, who lives the other side of the tunnel, was one of our paper boys. And Eleanor Hurley, one of her brothers, was there until he died, poor little boy. But, the roots here, and that's how I know all these people. Tranny used to live up on the same street as I live. And people have come up today to talk to me that I haven't seen for some time. There's a couple of friends there, too, all over.
Would anyone like to take me up on my offer to move up now? Why don't we take a little break here and move you on up? And someone suggested moving the table on. How do you suggest we do that? Just face the camera a little more. Everybody grab a chair.
We used to have a grocery store up there on Golden Gate. Some of them.
Or whatever.
Yeah, Diminetti.
Eliminated.
And some of the old timers still living around the area. I'm trying to see.
Another question that's come up several times, there is some interest in the school situation around here. I understand that prior to the locale of Washington Elementary School down here, which is to say that's the second series of buildings that's been on that location. Earlier than that, there was another elementary school, and that was somewhere located down in the general direction of the Standard Oil Refinery.
That's right.
Exactly where, I'm not clear, so maybe one of you can fill us in on that.
Right near the corner of Castro and Standard Avenue.
Kenny Park.
Yeah.
Kenny Park?
Kenny Park.
And how many grades did they have there? Was it 1 through 8? K through 8?
There was a little tiny building for the primaries. Mrs. Axtell was one primary teacher, and a Miss Bradley. And then the big building came later. Or it was there at the same time.
And then the high school was there after that.
Then there was a high school located
Yeah,
down
there's
there?
about 3 rooms in that, the corner of Eddy and Standard Avenue, because I started high school there.
So you started high school there, and then you finished up at Richmond Union up there at
That's right.
23rd and Bissell.
This was still Richmond High School, but this, the new building, and I went over with them to the building there. I'm trying to think of anybody else.
Was this part of the Siege School District before it became the Richmond School District?
No,
Somebody told me it was the
Not
Siege
the-
School District.
No, the Stage was in our district, I think, then.
Okay, another area that has come up, interest shown a number of times, and that's what did youngsters do for entertainment back in those
Around the
days?
streets.
And
We played in the streets.
I suspect they didn't stand in front of Ron's Market sucking things out of paper bags. And so that there probably were some other activities around that were a little more fascinating.
They played baseball and
Yeah.
all the games, and they were the Bay or the Point Richmond, They used to come all the way over to Point Richmond. We were kind of special because we lived here because they could go swimming down there. Other places they couldn't have a place to swim. And what else? They played baseball and football,
Cozy
whatever
Cove?
it's marbles or whatever
Cozy
else.
Cove.
Yeah, I used to go down to Cozy Cove too. There was swimming down
We
there.
skated up and down the hill.
That's right.
Came down with a bamboo stick between our legs down Washington.
Your mother let you do that?
I was born in Point Richmond, and what we used to do, they had a curfew then when we were kids, and we always met in front of the old library. Well, here, right in the front here, where they had the Indian, And we always met there every night after dinner, and the kids would all play together. There was a whole gang of us. We'd play follow the leader and hide and seek. We'd go up the hills and down the hills. Until 9 o'clock we had a curfew. I guess it was the firehouse or something had the bell, and then we all went home. But we all met as gangs and Halloween and everything. We all took off together. But that, and then like she says, we had the speeches and all that sort of thing. That was for summer play though.
Could you give your name, because we are recording this and it'd be interesting to know.
Oh, my name is Irene Rolino Patterson.
Thank you.
And then also, we used to go swimming down there at Caps Beach. Oh, yeah. That was just this side of this Centerville Ferry. I guess parents nowadays would just throw up their hands in horror because we used to just go down on the beach, and some of the boys, for instance, the Petersons and some of those, they built these flat-bottom rowboats. You could not tip them if you wanted to. And we would row out to the Standard Oil Wharf, and the fellas out there, they'd give us oranges, apples. If you went near the Standard Oil Wharf now, in a rowboat, you'd probably get shot. And we would stay there on the, well, as I think back now, of course there wasn't the pollution in those days. But we would play, we'd swim there, and couple of the fathers built some rafts, and we'd swim out to the rafts and dive off of the rafts. And then if it was cold, which it very often was in the summertime around here, we'd build a big bonfire on the beach. We'd sit around there, but we'd always be back before dark. And then later on, when the NAP was built, of course, we had the tennis courts. Yeah. We led a very, very easy life. We'd play tennis in the morning, and we'd swim down the old beach, and it didn't cost a cent except a few tennis balls, maybe a restringer racket once in a while. And there was no cars. In those days, if you had an automobile, you were really in the upper brackets. So we did most of ours walking. We would walk to the show on 5th Street on Sundays or Saturday afternoons. And for 10 cents, we would walk from the point over there. And for 10 cents, you could go to the show, and then maybe you'd have a nickel to get an ice cream cone or something. And you'd come back, and we just didn't know any better, so we were happy and satisfied.
You know, they had a social life here in Portage. You girls must remember when they had the Opera House.
Oh, yes.
We had a big Opera House on Stan Avenue. They had dances there, and they had fights there, and they had operas, and they had everything. That building.
But of course, they didn't have that. That was in the evening.
Yeah, right.
And that was for the old, well, when I say would be teenagers.
And one of the most famous fights they ever had was held out there in the Santa Fe lot. Some of the men here must remember it. I don't know who the fighters were, but who was it? Yeah.
We have a pair of boxing gloves from that.
We got to find it.
Marion, can you talk a little bit about Cozy Cove? You were telling me this morning some of the...
Well, yes, we used to go down there on Saturday. They had a big dance hall, dance platform down there, and a player piano that you could play a record for or a roll for a nickel. And everybody pooled their money, and we put money in there, and we'd dance. Saturday mornings maybe, or Saturday afternoon. And then at night...
What dance did you do?
Well, very nice dancing.
Nice.
And at night, up around the Methodist church, that corner, there would be about at least 20 of us. And we played Run, Sheep, Run, Kick the Can. We played until it got dark. We just had the best time. Yeah, those were all kinds of games. And then another thing, a lot of people that work at the Standard Oil came from Whiting, Indiana. And we used to have whiting picnics down at Cozy Cove, too. All the people that came from Whiting would go down there.
They were all moved as a group, you mean, when they opened the new refinery?
No, they came...
One by one.
I believe Mr. O'Hara's father came in 1901, and then my dad came in 1908, and I think he was one of the last ones to come from Whiting. And in between that, all the others came.
Rosemary, you had a question?
Another thing that Marion mentioned to me one time was walking down and taking the ferry over to Marin County and hiking on Mount Tam. Did you used to do that?
Yeah. And I remember one night, we got lost coming back. There was a whole crowd of us, probably about, 15 or 20 girls, all girls. And we got into Kentville finally. We knew if we kept coming down, we'd finally come to someplace we could get a train into San Rafael. And we got a train into San Rafael, and we had to get a taxi cab to take us to the ferry, because it was almost 12 o'clock, and the last ferry left at 12 o'clock. And at that time, they didn't have the nice freeway they have now. They had a hill that you came down to the ferry, and the taxi driver, one of the girls happened to know who the taxi driver was. She'd gone to school with him or something. So he started honking the horn at the top of the hill and honked the horn and kept the ferry waiting for us. And we all came back at 12 o'clock. I mean, you wouldn't dare do it now.
Caroline, do you have any recollections of the
Well,
kids' activities?
talking about the cars, I remember we had a streetcar strike, you know. That was 1918 or 19.
A strike, you say?
A streetcar strike. So we had to walk from the Point to high school at 23rd and McDonald. So we were quite lucky because the Peterson family up on Crest, their father had a car. And when he wasn't working at Standard Oil, he'd take us home. We thought that was great. Otherwise, we'd have to walk.
We used to have to walk lots of times because about half a dozen cars would come at one time, so we'd have to walk home. Right here at the Point from 23rd and McDonald. We didn't think anything of it. They'd come down Ohio through the fields. There were no houses there. So we'd all jabber and talk all the way home.
What year were the streetcars put in? Because I always remember taking a streetcar.
Oh, we took streetcars, but they'd come about sometimes half a dozen at a time.
And what year did they put the streetcars in, though?
I don't know what year they
Well, they were here
Well,
when
they were here when we came.
I know, that's why I say, as she was saying walking, but the streetcars must have been here, gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was when they were on strike, she said, on strike.
Oh.
Well, ours was because they just weren't keeping up. Something had happened to them. Well, if one was held up, then the others would all be held up.
I just wonder when they were put in, though.
Well, they must have been in the early 20s or late 20s.
Oh, way before that.
Well, because I know
I think I was born, they were there.
Well, no, I mean, when I went to high school, we went by streetcar, and they used to have the, what do they call them, the trailers? And all the kids would try to get in the trailers so they could rock the car.
I used to have to get out about 2 blocks ahead of time up at 23rd so I wouldn't get in trouble. Some of the fellows would rock the car. Then you get in trouble.
Does anyone here have any comments on that era or questions?
You remember when it opened the tube? That we was dancing, it was too music.
Yeah, the
Tunnel.
One, it's like I'm the woman I got the prize.
Yeah.
For dance the rat bottle.
Yeah, I know you would, all right.
When the
The
tunnel
woman,
That was a celebration when the tunnel opened?
Oh, yeah.
oh,
a dance,
we
we danced all over the streets.
I've still got my dance program from that.
Somebody just said that happened in 1902. Was there? Is that a fact? You were all 1 year old.
They're about the railroad tunnel, they're talking about the others. That was late.
Could you state your name for our record here?
It's Elsie Spinola. I came here in 1921, and you wondered what children did for entertainment. Every Sunday afternoon, the Salvation Army would come here and form a semicircle around this Indian chief that used to be out here, and there was a great big water trough for horses to drink out of, and I lived at 39 Washington, and it was easy for me to be the first one there, and I could get in that basin, and there was no water in it, and if you came every Sunday, you got a little Bible. I still have the little tiny Bible at home. And they used to bring their tambourines and play music, and then they'd go around to the bars and collect money.
Make the sinners pay for your Bible. The next big historical event, at least from the standpoint of someone who hasn't lived through it, is World War I. And I wonder if there are any particular recollections about what World War I did to Point Richmond. We obviously didn't have a shipyard here. Great interest has happened subsequently, but was there anything in particular that the area changed? Or that,
But I know I had to give speeches in the 8th grade. What do you call it, 3-minute speeches, 1-minute speeches or something for patriotism.
condemning the Krauts or something like that?
No. Trying to get people to donate, or buy war bonds, that was it. We had stamps at school, and then you got a bond, you got enough stamps.
World War I came along, and my two brothers had to go to war, and my young brother, now he was still in grammar school, so it was left up to my mother and I to run the newspaper because my father had died. So, and we used to have a place right next to it, what's the Hotel Mac now, it's known as, that used to be known as the Colonial Hotel. People named Reardon started that, and she married somebody named Jim Pope. And his 4 descendants of his are still alive down here, and I keep in touch with the 4 girls, Point Richmond. And it used to be a lively place. They used to have a lot of shipping here, and the stevedores used to come over to load the ships. And you know, out of the different wharfs, Standard Oil, Point Orient. We used to hike clear out to Point San Pablo and Point Orient. Some of the men, girls' fathers would be working long shifts. We'd hike clear out there and back, bring them their lunches, because they worked all day long. So, and we used to hike clear out to Point PRHA here through the hills and around. You don't think anything of it. And here nowadays, they can't go 2 steps without something, either a pair of skates or something.
They taught us at school to knit too. Yeah, knit washcloths, socks, for the helmets for the soldiers.
Every morning go to White Navy with the bogey in the bread. Every morning.
Yeah, they used to have a bakery down on Standard Avenue.
Yeah.
French bakers, of course, the bakers had to leave town. Most of them were aliens, you know. So they had to get out.
Most of the bakers were aliens? You mean they were
Yeah,
Italian? Is
down
that
on
the
that
idea?
right there, Irene, there was.
Well, no, you're thinking
That was-
of World War
that's where
II.
World War
Whatever it is.
They had to leave, yeah,
That's right.
that was World War II.
But they were our allies in World War I.
Yeah.
so-
Yeah, that's what I forgot about that.
Yeah,
Right.
the World War I, my father was a
That's right.
citizen when he had the
They didn't
bakery
have
in
enough employees,
1914.
so they had to break that up.
Lucretia.
I'd like to go back a little sideways to the earthquake, because I have heard that some people came from San Francisco and stayed here for a while and were made welcome by the people of Point Richmond. Where did they stay? In people's houses, or was a camp set up for them?
Well, my uncle and his family, my father's brother, they came over and we found a place for them. It used to be called Blue Row. It's on Marine Street. There's that row of houses down there between Golden Gate and the Standard Oil, you know. And they stayed in that area there until they could get back to San Francisco, because he was in the newspaper business too. So he had to rent a place until his area grew up again.
Did any of these people stay who came over when the fire
yes.
happened? Did they move here and stay?
I have a friend, their name was Wade, and they came over here. Pat Davis is a descendant of theirs. Maybe you know Pat, a lot of people. She's a descendant of theirs, you know. She's the granddaughter. So that was quite some time ago.
There was a family, there aren't too many of them left, but there was a family by the name of Hansel.
Yeah.
And Mr. Hansel was a lighthouse keeper. And it must have been Southampton, do you think?
It was.
And I know after the fire, his wife and children came over from San Francisco, and they lived in the lighthouse for a while. And they used to have to row the children to school, and then eventually back and forth in a rowboat. And then eventually the family bought a house up on Terrace, and their granddaughter is still living there.
Is this the lighthouse now that was shown in the slide?
Yeah, it must have been, because that was the only one that would be in this area other than the brothers, and he was not at the brothers.
Mr. Murphy, you had some information about that?
All right. Answer Lucretia's question. Most of the refugees stayed in San Pablo. Rockefeller had built a hunting lodge out there. In fact, it's still there. Today, that's known as the Rockefeller Lodge. He set up tents all around his property. And one building is still standing in the back, which was the infirmary. And they stayed there for a considerable period of time. There were a lot of people who came over to San Pablo. This building is now in Church Lane, right near the St. Paul's Church. And in fact, we're having our 50th high school reunion there this year.
That's right.
So they put a lot of people in there.
County line stays.
Anybody else have any recollections about the earthquake before that? That's an area, obviously, that we can't hope to get from anyone who hasn't been here for 50 years, but anyone else in the room have any comments?
I would like to, my name is Henry O'Hara, and I was born here in Point Richmond, somewhere between 50 and 100 years ago. And the picture that doesn't show the lighthouse, I don't know if you noticed it or not, but the lighthouse has always had a big list to one side, at low tide, you can see it quite pronounced. And I asked Mr. Huntsville, as Eleanor mentioned, about him being the keeper there. I asked him, how did it feel to be out there? And he said, well, the thing took a lot of zigs and zags, and all of a sudden it went to one side. And he knew something happened, but of course in those days he had no communication. And so then he could see the fire in San Francisco. So he took the boat and he rowed over to Angel Island and asked him what happened. And they said, well, this had an earthquake. And so he rowed back again to the lighthouse to do what he's supposed to be doing. Of course, in later years, to keep the thing from actually falling over, they piled out of rock around it. And as one of the gentlemen said here, they eventually, not too many years ago now, they just took that house off and took it up in the San Joaquin River. So it's up there as a yacht club. And regardless what people did at the time of the earthquake, well, a lot of them came to Point Richmond. And in fact, some of the families are still here. And our uncle, Martin Muldowney, was the builder, the operator of what is now the Ivy Inn. And a lot of people came there. Mary mentioned about the Waite family, which are really old timers here. Some are still living here. And they came, and that was our family's first meeting of the Waite family, plus many other families in the area that are still around here that came. Some did come to Point Richmond.
Jim Hansel and my cousin went to school together in San Francisco, and they didn't meet him until they went to school after the earthquake. They didn't know either one and the other were here.
Marion, when was it you were working in Winehaven?
About 1920. And I can remember the hotel and the houses and everything, and I was a bookkeeper out there, and I had to take when I kept the men's time, I had to take out for the hotel and their meals and everything. I can remember that.
So that was so isolated that people tended to live right there rather than here at the Point.
We went out in a car. I don't know whether some people remember Johnny Belliardo.
I do.
I think he went into the flower business at one time. But anyway, he used to meet his car down here at where the spot is now, and he took us down there. I mean, he took us to Winehaven, brought us back every day.
And when the children of the people who worked at the winery lived in Winehaven, they paid for a man to drive the children into Washington School. Yeah.
There's a post office in
And
Winehaven.
pick them up and took them home again, too.
Why was that now? The distances aren't all that great, certainly no farther than others have discussed here.
Oh, no, that's a hike
good
here out to Winehaven.
And those were little kids, small children.
They were taxed in by the
They were.
parents. I mean, parents paid for
I
it.
hated to have to walk it every day.
Hiking is different than having to walk every day.
Trent? Yeah.
I remember the Stenmarks, they used to live on these
At the
Brothers
lighthouse.
Island. They had a family of 4, I think 4 or 5. They used to come in on the train. When the box factory from the Standard was going great out there by Winehaven, the train took the men out to work, and then they'd bring the Stenmark children back to the old Standard Avenue school. And then in the evening, when they went back to pick up the men, the Stenmark children went home with them. Then they had a lodge that met them at the Point, took them out to the island. Some of the family are still here, grand to the 3rd generation, probably. Of the Stenmarks are still here.
Who's living in those houses now up there?
Where?
Winehaven.
It's all Navy now.
Is it all Navy?
It's a munitions deposit or depot or fuel deposit.
Because they're well kept there, really well kept.
Healy and Tibbetts had a quarry out there too, see, and they could come in from that quarry too, it's just quite rich.
How about, speaking of quarries, when did the quarry out here go in now? That's back in the 20s, is it not? The big one that's out here?
That used to be there when we'd go swimming down from.
Would you swim in the quarry the way the
No,
kids
but
do
that was
today?
down, no, we didn't, we always swam in the dirty old bay.
The old bay.
Blake Quarry you're talking about?
That's the one right out here near Brickyard. So,
I remember they had a swimming hole at Brickyard Cove too, remember? We used to have to dive into, it was a big hole.
But that was not as popular as the.
No, because you had to swim, it was a deep one. It was a regular hole.
That Point PRHA was very dangerous.
You mean the Brickyard Cove?
No, I mean Point PRHA, if you had to come in there on a launch or anything, it was very, very dangerous at that time.
No wonder we're
The
still alive,
tide
so
was strong.
we
The
swim.
tide was very strong. Because around the earthquake, they sent over the papers to my dad that way. One of them was lost, but then lost on it. I don't know how many, at that time.
Lucretia.
I wanted to ask if there was any particular promotion made at the time of the opening of the Panama Canal in Richmond. I know that there was sort of a land bust boom at that time where lots were offered for sale because they thought there was going to be a big development. But was there any celebration of the opening of the Panama?
The exposition, that's the only thing I remember. Over here, Panama Pacific Exposition on the island, you know.
How about the 1914?
On the island?
Yeah, what do you call Treasure
How about that?
Oh, Treasure Island went in 1914.
Well, over in that area, I don't know exactly where it was, but it's the Panama Pacific
On the
Exposition.
on the Embarcadero, down by the yacht club, where the big building by it's now the Exploratory.
Yeah, right.
That's right, that's it.
But that celebrated the opening of the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
And I wondered if anything happened in Richmond.
I don't remember it either.
Okay.
Just except that we were over there, took in everything, that's the whole month.
How did,
APIE, Panama Pacific.
Yeah, that's right, I have a couple of those things.
And where was that? In the 1915 one?
That's the 19.
That's what I was been asking, trying to find out.
Yeah,
That was the Panama Canal celebration.
Yeah, PCIE.
Yeah, so they did celebrate then.
Well, over there, what you mean here, not here.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
How did people make a living around here? After the streetcars went in, was there kind of a commute traffic going to Oakland or something of the sort, or did people tend to work right in the immediate area?
I think a lot of people worked out here in the Standard and Santa Fe and, you know, other
Other
things
people went
around.
to San Francisco. We used to go on the train and the boat.
Very cool.
Not the auto ferry, that came in after. I mean, the regular Santa Fe boat that would take the people that came from the east, they'd bring them down, they'd come on the train, and then we'd go down to the pier and go
So
over.
the commute was probably just about as long as it is today. It probably took you
Well, but
40 minutes.
it was very pleasant
I bet it was.
because the boat was comfortable and they played cards and read and they had a little restaurant there. Oh, Lord knows. Probably, I don't remember, but it probably was very little because we didn't make much money in those days. But as an aside from that, you know, the train used to stop down here where right about Dorothy's Corner, you know?
Yeah.
And
We got the steam
engineer, yeah, the steam train. And the engineer knew just about everybody. And he would park his, he'd stop his engine so that he could see who was running down Richmond Avenue, and by golly, they would wait. Now, can you imagine that in this day and age?
There was a very sad thing happened down there.
Yeah.
In the early days too. A father and a son worked for the Santa Fe, Billy Wing and his father. And the father was in one engine coming one way and Billy was in the other engine, and they collided at Point Richmond, and both of them were killed.
They were in the train, you mean,
Yeah.
the train?
Yeah,
The Santa Fe train.
There used to be a brickyard too, just about where the Rod and Gun Club was too. Bob Pickett used to come in down from out there too.
I remember the train killed a mother and the baby. When it closed, under the two.
Yeah, the tunnel here.
That was a
My
Coke.
daughter
She lost
still-
her arm.
That was a Coke.
This was 19.
Yeah, that's right.
This was
Mr. Coach is the
1914.
rest of them out here, left the Musicville, I was talking to him.
This was 1914.
My brother was the one. You know, talking about the brickyard out this way, this Gerlach Hotel down here, just before you enter the tunnel here, Richmond Avenue, you know, before you cross the track. Yeah, see, Gerlach was the superintendent out there at the brickyard. You see, it's on his, on that building.
J.G. Gerlach.
Yeah, there were 3 boys, too, went to school. One of them went when I was going, and 2 others after that. One became a lawyer. I don't know what happened, I guess the 2 younger ones must be still alive. Once in a while, I run into somebody. I tell you who's here today is Alice Hadley, who used to live up in Washington. You know that house up in the hill across the railroad track? Alice came up here today to talk to me. I was so glad to see her. Where are you, Alice?
I'm right here.
Alice Watts is her name now. She's a retired nurse. Are you retired, Alice? I don't know whether she is or not. Are you retired, Alice?
Yes, I am.
Oh. No.
Long time.
Departing from our,
I quit.
let's depart from our historical approach for a moment. I've got several questions. Does anyone have any information about Dr. John Tewksbury? I want to know where his home was in San Pablo and if Emily Tewksbury was his second wife. Are there other Tewksbury descendants in the Bay Area today? Does anyone happen to know that?
No, did you ask at the museum, what's her name? Ethel Kern knows a lot of that. I went to high school
Yeah,
with
that's a
Ethel.
suggestion about looking it up.
Uh-huh.
Local bottle collector is interested in Ben Schoen and his family drugstore here in Point
Oh,
Richmond.
yes, they used to be here.
What's his name?
Ben Schoen, S-H-O-E-N?
Now, they used to, I think it's right across here.
Shane.
Wasn't it right across here, Clara?
Yes, in Washington Avenue.
Yeah, it was on Washington.
Right across the
There
street.
was
Yeah, just
Lang
about
was
across
here.
the
I don't
street.
remember the other name though. Neidecker.
Palmetiers.
No,
that's
this
it.
is,
Well, Neidecker was before that.
Yeah, Lang.
Lang was first.
When was Palmetier?
that was later.
Palmetier was the last
He
one.
was the last. He was here just about with a lot of redness now.
Schoen, I don't remember.
I don't think Alice, Ruby, remember, Ruby Ellis because
Sounds like the question a little more specific. I'd like to know where the bottles are. I think that's going to be a little harder, even in the private family. The Arnold family, and how many are with us?
You mean Jim Arnold?
Are the Arnolds?
Charlotte was two families
Two
of
families.
Arnold.
Families of Arnolds?
Yeah,
One
Bill
was the
Arnold.
sheriff, and Arnold was the
Jim
sheriff.
and Bill Arnold.
I know where Isla is, and his daughter,
That's
Jim Arnold.
Jim Arnold's daughter.
I have letters from
What is she doing?
her. She's up at, that coal place up in the mountains.
Colfax?
You're down.
Place.
She had 3
There's
brothers
that
too.
place you go, begins with a P.
Paradise. Paradise?
Paradise. That's where the Isla is.
Okay, the next era that, skip.
Then Bill Arnold was his brother, you know, was me. We used to work out the standard. With one daughter, they had one daughter. She went to school with Mary Bill, and I don't know where she is, I haven't heard.
One of them went, not Island family, but the other, I can't think of her name.
Rita.
Rita. Yeah,
Around Santa
yeah,
Cruz.
she's in, around Santa Cruz. I used to hear from her, but I don't anymore, so I don't know whether she's
No,
alive or
Isla
not.
says she doesn't hear from her either.
You know who I might ask him? That priest who used to be here, Father Wagner, because they were married into his family somehow or other. And her son married someone. I might find out that way. You know who I mean, but, you know, he used to.
I remember Father Wagner. Is that who you mean?
Yeah, but his sister, let me see. Oh, wait a minute. Some relation of his married into that family. The Arnold girl not married. And his wife,
Bill?
I don't know exactly.
Bill
how-
Scribley?
Arnold lives in Oroville and is retired, and I just got that information last week from, used to be Miss Austin, lived across the street from us on Montana.
Oh, the one who was visiting here?
Howard is retired in Oroville.
Which one is that, Isla? Howard, yeah.
Howard.
Yeah. What was the other boy's name? He went to school with.
Wesley Ogden.
Wesley.
Arnold
He's
did.
the one who went to school with my brother.
There's Ogden and Howard and Isla.
Yeah, that's right.
On a personal note, our family just returned from Washington, D.C., where we spent a great deal of time at the Smithsonian. One of the more interesting exhibits was a collection of 30s Rooseveltiana, as it were, which left you with a feeling of community, solidarity, and adversity, as it were. When you finished seeing the exhibit, one had the feeling that in spite of the absence of what Ronnie laughingly calls the social net, there was something going at that time which seemed a safety net, which seemed to keep people surviving and keep people working together and keep a spirit up, maybe a community notion that somehow we were all in this thing together and we're going to get out of it together. And I'd be interested in knowing if you had that feeling here at Point Richmond and just exactly what people did for one another when people lost their jobs and found themselves out in the street or threatened with being out in the streets. Do you have any recollections at all of the early 30s?
Well, all I remember is hearing about so many people at the Standard Oil at that time were buying homes, as they are today. And
there's no depression in the oil business.
There was lots, well,
Yes,
some of them worked
were laid
3
off.
days, some of them worked 4, some of them didn't work at all. But anyway, in order to stop foreclosures and one thing and another, the Standard Oil made arrangements with the Mechanics Bank to lend more money or extend some loans. Now that was just what one corporation did. And then eventually, of course, things got back to normal. But, it was very difficult. But in those days, you didn't have Social Security, you didn't have welfare, so you made the best of what you had. And people would help one another.
Didn't have unemployment insurance, did you?
No aid of any kind. You just
Holes in your shoes.
yeah, put cardboard.
Were there any of the people who were well enough off to be able to assist others, or was everyone pretty much in the same boat that they all
I
were?
think everybody was helping. And I know one thing, they cut back the Standard Oil, but nobody complained. To give somebody else a job, maybe work 4 days 1 week and 5 the other, and then they cut them down. But you didn't hear complaining. Everybody was helping the other.
And I don't think there was any general, at that time, I don't think there was a general layoff.
No.
It was a cutback. When I was working during the Depression, I was working in San Francisco for an engineering firm. While it wasn't a large firm, they did a very large business because they put in power plants and that sort of thing all over the West. And what they did was, they laid off nobody, but they would reduce everybody's wages, percentage-wise. So after 7 years, I made less salary than I did when I started. But we all had some jobs. And there was no fights, no marching up and down the street about it being unfair or anything of that kind, because things were pretty tough. If you didn't have a job, you really had a hard time.
One had an impression that there were more individual homeowners that felt themselves threatened than apartment dwellers, and perhaps there were more people percentage-wise who owned their homes. But in New York, where I happen to be from, they had a moratorium act so that people didn't have to pay back on their mortgages, and that was true right from the early 30s right through probably 1939 or 40 when things began to pick up. Did California have anything like that? They only had to pay the interest. You had to pay nothing on the principal of the mortgages. So no one lost their homes as a result.
Well, some did, but not too many. Not too many. I don't think the Depression lasted quite as long out here as it did in some areas.
A lot of people here were self-sustaining too. They would have gardens and they'd have chickens and they'd have a goat and rabbits and whatever they were here.
Chicken, rabbits.
Everything under the sun. It's surprising. And those are the people today who have something.
I was going to say that coming from Italian parentage, naturally they came from the old country already doing this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was natural for them. They raised all their own vegetables, rabbits, like she says, chickens and eggs, and down by the bay, all those Italians, they've got, and like my folks own this bakery, and my dad had sold it just before the Depression and had invested all his money, and naturally when the stock hit bottom, well, he hit bottom with the rest. And so they were used to hard work, so my mother just went to work. And as usually, there were still people with money that were in the Standard Oil that were the bosses, like the Griffins, the Gerards, and they hired people like my folks to do their menial work. I mean, they didn't wait, we didn't have blacks and all this sort of thing, so it was the foreigners that did it. So we all pitched in, and we were all a family too. Everybody, the families lived together. The children didn't move out like they did now, you know. I mean, we stayed home till we got married, so everybody pitched in with a little bit they could do. And I worked in homes, worked my way through college doing housework for people. My mother did that. We all did that. My father did that. So that's how we managed, you know. And I'm sure a lot of them did that.
So we had the paper, you know.
You never go on,
They had to have them all to make anything. They had them all for years.
Rosemary?
One day down at the Founders Day for the PTA, some of the past presidents were talking about the things they had done during the Depression to help the kids at Washington, the families of the kids at Washington School. Do any of you recall taking up collections of clothes and food for families?
The Westside Improvement Club used to give baskets at Christmas time.
That's right.
They'd find out the names of people that had children and not much money and needed help, and they'd give them a big basket of food.
Donna?
You mentioned the Westside Improvement Club. Do you know when it started and why, and can you list some of the things that they did?
Well, now they bought the Indian. There's no more.
Yeah.
For one thing, and I think they have helped all along, different things at the point. They planted trees and they
sold for fur there in the center too.
Yeah.
Of the fire.
But that they didn't take care of.
No.
The flagpole,
That was the snap, that was donated.
And at the net.
Yeah.
When did it begin? Does anybody remember?
Yeah, we had our
Pieces.
there's an anniversary, I know. So it was in the early part, I think.
I wanted to mention one thing. There was a family that was burned out up on Phoenix. This is a long time ago. And I know that there were several children at the school, and the school got together and they got enough together to refurnish their home and everything. That's a long time ago.
I wonder, to be a little specific here, whether the kind of game one plays at cocktail parties, how much did you pay for your house in 1943? I wonder if anybody remembers what one could have purchased a home for in Point Richmond back in the 1930s. Does anyone have any numbers in mind?
I haven't got no anything like that.
2,500?
No.
1,500?
For a long time, I know.
1,400?
That's 1,400. That's the low bid of the day. Anybody beat
we
1,400?
could have bought the lot right next door to us, Lawdale LH, and contracted for $100. But I had somebody meet
That's
of
about
my
the
own,
old-
I couldn't keep up with it, so I didn't buy it. And that was sold for over $6,000, and more than that, because it was resold. There was a house built on it now, which I never thought they'd be able to build on a place like this. Now, on that corner, have you been up there lately? Up next to us.
No.
Bid?
I understand that on Cottage, where Bob Davis used to live, that Dad Dornan was offered that for $500 at one time, but he couldn't afford it.
Oh, that's one. I would be a bit surprised.
Did you? I don't know.
Yes, he used to live there.
It's a two-story place,
Well, that was
205.
our,
That's where he used to live.
that belonged to Dim and Gerard.
Yes.
They also own the brick
We bought it
flats
from them.
on Martino and Richmond.
No, this is strictly on Cottage.
Standard Oil.
This was on Cottage.
207 Cottage,
205, I can't remember.
205.
Yeah, you have one.
It was our house.
Gentleman back here had a question, yes. Would you state your name, please, for our record here?
Ron Wada. And I was wondering if anybody remembered that as early as you can, before the banks got started or started lending money in a big way, how people built homes. Did they build them themselves? And if they had builders make them, where they got the money, how they financed them? Did the builders lend the money, or did the merchants lend the money, or the lumber company lend the money? Does anybody know that?
I know a contractor built ours, but I don't know too much about it, except that we paid for it. But I don't think in those days that they cost as much. Nothing cost as much.
The contractor built it, but then did you pay off the contractor?
No, evidently, my dad paid. I don't remember all that. Because we had, as I say, we were fortunate enough. They had to pay. You work hard, but you still had the money coming in all the time.
I think most people didn't buy till they had cash.
Well, the old rule used to be that you bought a home that was 2.5 times your annual income, which of course has now been wiped out by escalating house prices in the 70s. But even at that, in the 30s, if it was 2.5 times your annual income, you had to borrow some money or somehow get it from somebody.
Your friends.
Yes.
My name is Ann Roberts. Does anybody remember the President of the United States coming through this area on a train trip in 1912? Who was that? And did the school set out to see him? And what was the
Franny, were you going to answer that one? Oh, I didn't catch it.
I want to hear. I know one time we wanted to buy a house, and the bank would not lend us money to buy a house at the point. It was a bad investment.
Bojat had money, do you remember? Bojat? He had money because we bought that house on Cottage, and he helped my dad get
Yeah, friends.
the down payment.
Let me ask something about that. When my wife and I first moved here, we were told that the reason that there were so many vacant lots scattered here and there was that for years immediately preceding our arrival, that the local oil refinery would come by from time to time and give you paint to repaint your house because the sulfur had changed your paint color to yellow. And your silverware all turned black. And presumably you got black lung but didn't know it, or something along those lines. In any event, the place stank something fierce, and therefore, in this apparently delightful area with all of the amenities that it has, there were still building sites. And this was we came here in 1968. So that's not all that long ago. Do any of you have recollections about these miasmal fumes drifting from down here? Can you tell us a little something about that?
It's all over the furniture. If you worked for the standard, you didn't mind it too much.
It was particularly bad up on Golden Gate Avenue. It would take the paint right off the house. But then you get the paint from the Standard Oil and refill it.
It didn't come in just where we were. See, we were on Golden Gate, but it didn't hit us there, see.
So they would give you the paint, but you had to do your own labor. Was that
One
the
morning,
idea?
like that,
This is black stuff.
And I think we're all pretty healthy even today.
Yeah, I was going to
Still alive?
You'd be surprised how many people have lived to be 80 or 90 years in spite of the Standard Oil.
The old phrase is, it looks like pollution to you, but it looks like bread and butter to me. No, it works.
It used to be that city stuff that didn't kind of crackle under your feet. But that didn't bother you up above, it just under your feet.
Question, what was the normal cause of death back in those days?
Poor genes. It had nothing to do with
The thing that they do nowadays, like smoking, but I don't smoke, I don't care who smokes, but it's doing more harm than all that stuff did then.
Is anyone speaking of illnesses and problems? The big influenza epidemic of the 1920s, the 1921, 1920, thereabouts, that killed 17 million people worldwide, as I remember the numbers. Did that strike here in Plainview?
You used to have to wear a mask.
Yeah, I remember that because those kids had to wear, I was only in the kindergarten, and we had to wear little masks in school.
On the street.
Yeah, and then you start talking about community spirit. Well, the ones who didn't get the flu used to make chicken soup and deliver it to the ones who did have the flu.
That's right.
My mother made the chicken soup, and I used to deliver it all the people down with the flu.
My mother used to make custard for those people.
Yeah.
I was living down in the Colonial Hotel, they were sick people, and she kept some of them alive.
But you felt you wanted to visit the people who had the flu? You were
Well, we
willing to
did.
do
It didn't bother us
that?
the least. We didn't get it at all. We wore our little masks. We didn't get it at all.
They were recuperating too, poor people. It was so weak.
You remember the Dr. Conyan? Dr. Conyan, he was living in Santa Isla, with all the kids. We got Dr. Conyan was coming, no doctor was coming.
Everybody cut
Dr. Lucas, he never come near.
Evidence that there is progress in civilization, or the civilizing influence. In the 14th century, when people had the plague, they board them up inside the house and brick them off so that they would not contaminate the others.
you wouldn't be able to carry on if all the people who had masks on were what do you call it, weren't allowed out or whatever. They used to quarantine people who had scarlet fever. You'd be quarantined for 6 weeks. Smallpox. Yeah, smallpox. But see, nowadays they don't do that. They have something what is it, shots or whatever they do, kill them off the road. You know how they do.
Rosemary?
We hear about the first decade of Point Richmond, the fact that there were so many men here and very few women except for in the red light district. And it's talked about, but we don't have much documented about it. Do you know anything about that infamous red light district here?
Anybody want to answer that one? Let's take them one at a time.
It was on Railroad Avenue, and we weren't supposed to go down that street, the kids. But we did get to see some of the ladies, the Sally Sanfords of that day. And one was short and very, very heavy. She wore Rose. She wore a long coat, and I looked across there and wondered why I couldn't go and talk to her if I wanted to, but I wasn't supposed to. Then her pal, the other lady, was this big around. Slats, we call them. And the ladies were all on Railroad Avenue.
I used to play on that street, and I knew it well.
Bill says he used to deliver groceries there.
I used to work at Steve Otter's and also the Quarters. And that time, I don't think I was more than 10, 11 years old. And we had to deliver the groceries. But the one that I remember so well was the one named Grace Miller.
Oh, yeah, she was
Now, she lived directly behind the fire. And we used to get, what a kick we'd get about going in and see all these girls sitting around. It was a big deal for us kids.
Our place to pay their paper bills, too. My dad asked Rose Porter one day, how come she became what she was. She came from a very good family. Her sister was there, too. And she said, well, she was drinking. He said, well, why don't you give that up now? She says, it was kind of late. But later on, she got a hold of, she was a very nice person. And she got a hold of some rich fella. I understand they didn't get married, but what was the difference? They do that nowadays.
But one Point Richmond man did marry one of the girls.
That's right.
That was a big deal.
What's so odd, the house that they're shingling down there, you know, and they're remodeling, well, that's where Rose Porter used to live. And the other day, I happened to walk by there, and there was a man who is working around there, and I was remarking about how beautiful that place is. And I told him, I said, I remember years ago when Rose Porter lived here. And he said, well, isn't that a coincidence? That's my name.
But
there's no connection.
Yeah, my brother said that one of the ladies called him one time there, and she wanted him to get something to eat for it, and she gave him 25 cents. He thought that was great. He knew who she was. She didn't do anything to him.
She was a nice woman, and so was Alice.
Yeah, they were all very, very nice.
They were like
those two came very good family.
Was Alice the one we called Alice?
Yeah, Alice lived up there and back to what?
She had a boyfriend named Teddy Crowther, a little short guy.
We're overdue on time now, but we can't leave without talking about World War II. Obviously, that's the thing that put Richmond on the map. So anyone would like to begin talking about...
Could I tell about the shows?
Yes.
Over near where Tranny is now, there used to be the Royal Theater.
Oh, yeah.
Just two sides, and flat floor, and folding chairs, and the pianist had his piano, an upright piano, and beside his piano was a trunk. And he had all music there. And when the Cowboys and Indians were on, there was a certain piece he played for the Indians, the bad guys, and then another piece that he played for the good guys. And the love stories scenes, he had different music again. And there was a very stout lady at Point Richmond, and she always sat on 2 folding chairs. And when the Point Theater was built, and Mr. Terrazzi and his wife ran Point Theater, it was very plush after these folding chairs, you know, and he remembered Mrs. Brazil that had to have 2 folding chairs. So he took out the handle between them, and that was Mrs. Brazil's chair.
That fellow who ran that park, his name was Livingston. He was an Englishman. I mean, the picture show.
Did any of you present work in the shipyards in World War II?
I did.
You did. Can you tell us a little something about that?
Yeah, I went out there, I was very faithful, I thought I was going to help my country, and every day I went out there, I worked the swing shift from 4 to 12 as a material dispatcher and expediter. I seen a great big canvas, and gee whiz, it was laying on the ground, and I look at it and I think, here's all these people walking over this canvas, I'll have to pick it up. So I pick it up and put it up on a great big concrete block that was there. The next day I'd come to work and it would be down again. I'd pick it up again. And then I thought, gee, looks like I'm the only patriotic one out here. I'm going to quit this and let them walk over the canvas.
What was the spirit around here? Was there this notion that we're all really in this thing together and we're all going to work our fingers to the bone and so on?
I worked in Shipyard 3 on a craneway. And at that time, there weren't many colored people here. And we had a colored crew. And we had a whirly thing that had to pick up, big sheets of metal, steel, and put them up on a platform. And those men worked real good. And I don't know, we worked together for the good of our country.
Too many people came to live in Point Richmond that time. We were rather selfish about it. And we had our work over where we worked in City Hall. It was doubled and tripled. You couldn't keep up the fellows if we go to war and you get somebody who didn't know anything and you were ready to quit.
Were there any temporary buildings constructed up here in the Point, or were they all down in the flats? Housing?
Down here.
This lower area? Around, of course, next to the sewage plant. I heard about that.
You know why there's no
By the
space?
school.
Yeah, 2 stories. Oh, and there was a beautiful cafeteria on Cutting here, and you could go there and for a couple of dollars, you and myself and my 2 sons could eat a good meal. God, we ate real good. There was another cafeteria down in the shipyard.
There was a big
Walk
lucky
down
store
there.
down there too, a big lucky store.
Well, the
Right.
train out here canal.
Mary, do you have any World War II anecdotes? Charlotte does.
Dad
Okay.
went by one of his lots one day and found a building on it.
Okay, well, we scheduled this from 1 to 3 and it's now 3:30, so I think we did go by very quickly. It certainly was an enjoyable afternoon. I want to thank our panelists.
That's your wife.
Oh, when that's very scary.